Hi, everyone. Welcome to the future of ratings in the cloud. I guess we're one of the last sessions of the day, so what a better way to break into the festivities than talk about rating. So my name is Brad Gaughan. I'm a product manager with Guidewire.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandesh Singh. I'm also product manager with Guidewire, working with Brad on rating APIs and integration.
Before we get started, I just need to mention the safe harbor statement. We're showing you some forward-looking things today, so timelines and feature content may be subject to change. Just wanted to call that out. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to look over the rating in the Guidewire platform. We'll do an overview of that. Then we're going to take a deeper dive into the rating tech. So I'll look at each individual component and sort of tell you what we're doing with them. And then we'll end that with a short future view demo. And then we'll present the roadmap. And then Sandesh is going to talk about the Workbench APIs in Tune. So when we started this journey to bring rating into the cloud and redevelop things, what we wanted to do was look at the whole life cycle of rating. So we started with this view that rating starts in the design phase with product design, and this is really where APD starts, and you've got product architecture, bureau content, vendor templates. And then we've got the develop phase of rating, which is where you spend your time creating the components and whatnot. That's where you do your rate tables, your rate books, routines, pricing. And then we have the distribution phase in the launch process, and that's usually heavy in IT. It's got a deployment piece, and there's also governance around what environments you can push to. And then we get into the sell and service piece, and there's two components to this. There's the rating runtime. That's really what the raw calculation engine, what's responsible for performance, scalability, and security and whatnot. And then we have the quoting piece, and that's where it comes together more of a view for the end consumer. That's where we develop transactions. We can handle multi-line policies and produce rating worksheets and quote comparisons and whatnot. And finally, we get into the metrics phase of things, and that's where it's testing and analytics. We're looking at financial performance, displacement testing, impact analysis, things like compliance and whatnot. And then that's an iterative loop around stuff. So from there, what we did was after taking a look at that, we decided, well, if we're going to develop this new engine, what are the key features that we need to make sure are in the engine? The first and foremost is performance. Anytime we talk about rating, everyone says, is it quick? And when we talk about performance, there's two types. There's like vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Vertical scaling refers to your large policy graphs, so things like 50,000 coverables on a policy, stuff like that. And then horizontal scaling is your peak demand scaling, where you're getting a lot of traffic at peak times. So we want to be able to accommodate both those patterns. Secondly, we've got this idea that analytics is important throughout the process. And when we talk about analytics, we start with the pricing side, and we're looking at when we talk about our predict group, and those folks are building a tool called Tune, or that's the code name of it. That's going to have machine learning and actuarial models, whatnot, built in. And then as we look towards the workbench itself, we're going to have analytics built into the workbench so you can tell who's using what and how. And we're also going to have downstream analytics for default dashboarding. So stuff like quotes, worksheets, things like that. Next, we're looking at transforming the developer experience. If any of you have worked in the existing RTM system, you'll know it's kind of designed to be a single user contributor model where you have to come up with heavy processes and then pass rate books along with your components that you're developing. We're going to change all that with the Rating Workbench. We're actually moving into a multi-user environment, code check-in, check-out, security enabled, all that. So everyone's working in the same house. Finally, we start talking about things like open rating APIs. We think these are really critical, and the rating APIs go not just for execution, but also for content publishing and for searchability and whatnot. And Sandesh is going to talk about those in a little while. And finally, reducing your total cost of ownership is a really important thing. And we're looking at key areas to do that. So one of the key areas is deployment. We're really looking at compressing that deployment cycle so it's a lot easier to publish rates with one-button clicks and stuff, and also low-code environments. So as we start this evolution, we began with RTM, which is an embedded rating engine. Exists today in Policy Center. It's not going away. In fact, you'll be able to select either the RTM engine or the cloud rating engine, and that'll be available by product type. So you can mix and match if you want. And as we move into the new world, we've got a whole stack. So we've got, I just want to call out that we have 2 multi-tenanted microservices. The first one is the rating design time. So that's going to be the area where you ideate and create your rates, unless they're getting pushed in by API. And then the other multi-tenant service that we have is obviously the execution engine, and that's what's responsible for running your rates. The one thing I wanted to call out in the new world is that there's no more GOSU in rating, and I'll say rating because I think I confused some people yesterday and they thought I meant Policy Center. It's actually no more GOSU in rating. And we're also getting rid of the concept of parameters, and they're merging in, for those of you that know about those. The first component that I wanted to talk about is this new component, rate plans. And we'll talk about it in a little more detail in a bit. But rate plans are going to replace the GOSU rating engine. So in RTM, you would write your rates, and you would do complex logic like capping and cupping and whatnot in GOSU. And then that would tie into some other components into your rate books and your rate routines and whatnot. In the new world, we've gotten rid of that. Rate plans are actually a first-class component in rating now, and they're fully versioned and everything else. So you don't have to worry. You know, in the past, if you changed your RTM rating engine, you had to kind of worry about that logic affecting existing policies. That's no longer the case. And I'll talk a bit more about that. I should also say that rate plans are going to be the orchestrator for calling rate books. So they're the very first thing that get called, but I've got a slide on that in a bit. And then the next thing I wanted to call out, we used to go directly against the policy schema for rating. We've now created this mashup schema that's generated automatically from APD, and that's moving us towards stateless rating. So everything that you need to rate essentially should mostly be in the quote schema, and there's going to be a way to supplement it with if you're doing things like real-time credit scoring and stuff. But for the most part, the quote schema is going to contain things like claims history, cost information, all the stuff you need to do capping, cupping, and as well as all the regular rating. The other thing that I wanted to call out, in RTM world, we shared the system of record database with Policy Center. That's no longer the case. We have our own design time and runtime quote storage now. The one component that I think is super exciting is the rate publishing component. So this is, we're going to be working hard on this, not in this release, but in the next release, where basically you're going to be able to package your rating components and publish them up into an environment with a single button push. And that's really cool because that compresses a huge life cycle. And we're also going to put approval flows on that so that if you want someone to approve or multiple people to approve, it'll be similar to a GET pull request or something. We haven't quite invented it yet, but that's the idea. The next thing I wanted to talk about was unit testing. In RTM, we never really had a unit testing strategy. A lot of customers would create their own test harnesses and whatnot. In the new world, we're going to put unit testing with each component so that you'll be able to define unit tests and whatnot. And then we're looking at ideas such as when we publish up into an environment, maybe the tests automatically run prior to publishing and stuff. But we're pretty excited about the unit testing. And then worksheets. Worksheets always deserve a mention. Everyone loves them. But the problem with worksheets is they're not machinable in today's world. It takes a lot of work. You basically have to bring them into Policy Center and reconstitute them there and then send them downstream. Now they're going to be machinable data. So what that means is you can pass them along to your analytics if you want, along with the quote, so that you can analyze the two side by side. The other cool thing that it's going to let us do is be able to build multiple different views for the worksheets. So that means we can target brokers differently than underwriters and the content that they can see in rating worksheets and whatnot. And finally, we've got this new concept that we're bringing in called rate variables. And this is a really neat concept because what it's going to let you do is compartmentalize your logic and share it amongst rate plans and rate books and whatnot. So that means if you're doing something like a complex calculation, like the number of chargeable convictions in the last 5 years, that logic will be able to be encapsulated in a variable, and the consumer of the variable never needs to know what the calculation was. It's just they use that variable when they're designing the rates. And then we've got our set of APIs that Sandesh will be talking about. So we've got CRUD APIs, publish APIs, we've got our table query APIs, search APIs, and execution APIs, of course. So as we jump into things, the very first thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that we're breaking apart the monolith. So when you look at our existing ratebook strategy, it's very heavy because ratebooks have everything inside them. They were the versioning strategy. They also had the data in them for rate tables. So they were very heavy, and you could end up with an 80 or 90 megabyte file that you would have to pass along with maybe its predecessors that also were 80 or 90 megabytes, and you had to import them in the right order. We're getting rid of all that. So ratebooks actually are being broken apart, and what we're going to do with them is turn them into an orchestration layer. So basically, they know what rate routines and how to navigate the policy graph, and they produce all the costs that they need to produce on a single pass of the policy. So they'll have that navigation logic, but no more. Everything else will be individually versioned. So rate tables will be individually versioned, rate routines individually versioned, and all the components are like that. And what that means is you're no longer hardwiring version numbers into a rate book. It's going to dynamically find the appropriate version at runtime. What's that let us do? A lot better maintenance. Because now you're going to be able to actually do small incremental table updates, and you'll be able to just focus on that table and not worry about all the other content in the whole rate scheme. So the first artifact that I wanted to look at was rate plans and rate books. And this diagram is just it's kind of showing the call ways that things can do in the new world. And basically, you get your inbound request, which you can see on the left, and the very first component that gets selected is a rate plan. Rate plans have these things we call selectors. So that means you can have different rate plans by job type and a number of different factors like that, and of course, effective and expiry dates and whatnot. Now, rate plans are responsible for returning the finalized costs. So they're the area where you're going to write capping and cupping logic, or if you need to massage your costs after they've been generated from the rate books and whatnot. All that logic will be possible in the rate plans, and they're sort of the final guy that hands the costs off to the caller. Rate plans can call rate routines, they can call rate tables, or they can call rate books. Rate books can also call rate routines and rate tables. And all this stuff is sort of dynamic in the new order. So one of the cool things that we are going to be doing is including a diagramming component so that rate plans and rate books will be represented by logic flow, essentially. So what this is showing is our pseudo diagram that eventually will become a UX. So we run these 3 rate routines in parallel. Then we start a loop on each location, and then inside that location we go on each coverable, and then we do some conditional logic, and we either run rate routine 25 or we run rate routine 10 and terminate. So it's just kind of showing that what we're going to do is build these things diagrammatically, and then you're going to hook your logic components into the diagrams. The next component that I wanted to talk about was rate variables, and I mentioned those earlier. So the cool thing with rate variables is once they're defined, you define them in the workbench. Once they're defined, they can actually initialize themselves from any of the data sources available in rating. So that means they'll be able to get their initial value from a complex rate table lookup. Could be a rate function that provides it if there's really crazy logic like the chargeable conviction stuff. Could even be a static value where you just say it's 7 or something. But it also can reach into global variables and, of course, into the quote schema to get data. The next component that we're rethinking as we move it in to the cloud are rate tables. And in the new order, we're actually going to have 2 types of rate tables. They're going to be static and dynamic. The static tables are more for infrequently changing data or small data sets. So let's say under 2,000 rows of data. What's going to happen with those static tables is they're going to get compiled natively into Java bytecode and deployed, so there's no lookups going out to databases. This makes it much, much faster. And then we're also looking at the dynamic tables. And dynamic tables are meant to accommodate frequently changing data or massively large data sets. And what we're doing with that, we're going to be storing it in an index of some kind, probably something like Elasticsearch. And the cool thing with the dynamic tables, they'll be very fast on lookup, and they'll be able to hold as much data as you can put in there, so millions of rows. We're going to be using NoSQL technologies and stuff, so it gives us a lot more flexibility. The other neat thing about rate tables that we're doing is individually versioning the rows into dynamic tables. So what that's going to let you do in large data sets is incremental updates. So now you don't have to republish a million rows every time you add a value. You can just add the value. And you can add the value by API or through the Rating Workbench. The next component that I wanted to mention is rate routines. So rate routines are also getting a bit of a facelift. So first of all, any of the components, not just rate routines, but rate plans and rate books, anything that has logic that you associate with it, not only will you be able to use a business-friendly UX for low code, but for the more complex situations where the UX just doesn't cut it, or depending on the skill set of your rating team, you're going to be able to use Java. And Java is actually our first deployments. We don't have the UX yet, so we're writing rate plans in Java to start, and then the UX will be next. But the other cool thing is in the future, we're going to support Python. Python's the language of actuaries, it seems. So everyone seems to like using Python. So we're going to let you define your components in whichever way you want, Java, Python, or the UX. The cool thing is that they'll all work together seamlessly. So it doesn't matter which way it was created. And finally, rate routines are also going to be split into 2 now. So today we have cost routines, basically. That the whole purpose of a rate routine is to generate a cost. We're also going to add into that mix utility functions. So what that's going to let you do is create reusable logic. And utility functions are going to be able to return both scalar values, like a decimal, or complex values like lists and maps and stuff. So this is going to let you build reusable functionality for your rating. I've mentioned most of these components, but the one thing I also wanted to call out was marketplace rating components. So we see a future where you're going to be able to go to the Guidewire marketplace, and let's say somebody's written a novel implementation of capping that you want to use, or something like that. You'll be able to go in and grab those components, and then bring them into your rating ecosystem and start leveraging them. So as we start talking about the future and whatnot, we'll talk a bit about the roadmap. So up to Flen and earlier, it was really a foundational thing that we've been working on. So we had to design the whole architecture, and come up with all the concepts and look at all the ways that we wanted to improve the product as we evolved it into the cloud. So we've got things like global variables, which let you share data amongst rate routines at runtime. We've got things like support for complex pro rata, so linear, nonlinear. If you write in Canada, for example, motorcycles don't run in the winter, so we accommodate those things. And then we've designed this new Rating Workbench. So Flen is our very first release of Rating Workbench. We're excited for it because it's really the cornerstone of where we're going with things. And our very first deliverable in it is rate plans. So we have this sort of hybrid model right now, where we're leveraging your existing RTM stuff. So you define rate books and rate routines and whatnot in the existing RTM interface right now, and we ingest those along with the rate plans which you design in the Rating Workbench. By the time it gets out to GA, all that stuff will be lifted over, and you'll be working strictly in the Rating Workbench. In Garmisch, which is our next release coming up, it's quite a big release for us because, like I said, we're bringing those components over, like rate routines, rate tables, and whatnot. They're not going to have 100% functionality yet because there's a lot of work to do for one release. So by H release, we'll have full functionality that's equivalent to RTM for things like linear interpolation on the on rate table lookups and whatnot. So for that reason, in Garmisch release, we're looking to maybe go EA if we can. Hopefully we do. And it's going to support low complexity lobs. So things where you don't need stuff like the interpolation and whatnot. We're also looking at integrating with the actuarial workbench first release. So what we're enabling is allowing Tune to push model parameters automatically into Rating Workbench and then allowing us to publish those out. By H release, this is really the big release for us where we want to go GA. And we're looking at large policy optimization. So how do we efficiently rate 50,000 coverable policies? How do we deal with complex lines of business? And also, we're going to start, we've already started actually working with our Toronto team on SBTs. So if any of you are leveraging SBTs, we're starting to look at how SBTs can be published using our APIs into the cloud. And on the Rating Workbench area, this is where we're really going to get into rating variables, one-button deployments, diagramming components for the flow control, and a UX for the logic piece for doing the low code. And we're also looking at rating worksheets, which we know need to be there before we go live. As we move into the future, beyond H, we're looking at a migration utility so that we can bring all the existing RTM stuff as much as possible. But keep in mind that the one thing that we can't lift is GOSU code. So the more you put in GOSU, there's going to be a bit of work as you have to redo that. We can't automatically move that stuff. And then we're looking at a full set of APIs in the future. So we want you to be able to push content in, whether it's from the workbench or from a tool somewhere. And we're going to start focusing on things like rate debugging and whatnot so that you have a good tool set to be able to deal with your rates. And finally, this is where we start getting into unit testing, deployment approvals, and all the other great stuff that we've been talking about. I'm going to do a short demo. This is a future-looking demo. If any of you saw me talk yesterday on the live demo, I kind of got caught, and the live demo didn't work so well. So today I've got it actually, it's recorded. So we'll actually get to see a demo. So I'm just going to start this. This is actually going to Marketplace. And what we're doing is we're downloading the rate components from Marketplace to get us started. So now we're going to import them into Rating Workbench. We're just going to find the zip file from Marketplace. Those are all the components. Now it's brought them in. You can see on the right-hand side of the workbench, there's a rich area for searching. Now we're in the rate plan. I'm jumping quick. And we're just doing a scan through rate plans and rate books. And this is just to show you the diagrammatic flow and then what the visualization of the editor is going to look like. This is our search capabilities here. We've got a very rich search capability in the new world, and we're all indexed by Elasticsearch. The other cool thing is we've got folders now, so you can organize your components into folders. And eventually, folders may end up being a way to publish and also to secure. So we'll add security at the folder level. Now what we're doing, we're at the publishing point. So we've imported those components, and now they've pushed up into an environment. Now we're going to jump over and run a quote. So we calculated the quote. Now, we're going to jump over to Tune for a minute and just take a look at some scenarios. And we think that maybe we're not charging enough for young drivers. So the first thing we're going to do is sync a bunch of model parameters from Tune with the rating engine. It's going to use the APIs to do that. And now that we've got the parameters over, the next thing that we're going to do is take a look at scenario. So we're going to come in, and what we need to do is zoom in. We're going to create a new scenario, and it's going to be for examining whether we're charging enough for young drivers. This is a very simplistic example. So what we've done is we've highlighted the two age groups. We're running the scenario. After the scenario ran, this is the data that resulted from it, and we feel that by looking at it, we're not charging enough for 25 and under drivers. So what we want to do is adjust that and test a new model. So what we're going to do is push this model into the rating engine. But of course, nothing's complete without a fancy heat map, so we're going to take a quick look at the heat map to see the new distribution, and then we're going to publish in. Now it's been pushed into Rating Engine and actually published in real time into an environment, and we're going to refresh our quote, and voila, we see the increased premium, so now we're going to charge more for young drivers. But what I really wanted you to take away from that is the Rating Workbench UX and kind of the flow that we're envisioning from Tune into us to create this complete sort of tooling around pricing as well as rating. I'm going to hand it over to Sandesh now.
Thank you, Brad. Awesome stuff. So now all of the things that Brad talked about, I'm going to talk about rating APIs, which Brad alluded to in his presentation. So we are basically looking at 4 different sets of APIs, which cover the entire rating lifecycle. So starting with develop APIs. So when you are in your design phase of the rating, what you want is some APIs to create, retrieve, update, delete the different rating artifacts, be it your rate plans, your rate books, rate routines, anything. You should be able to do it through these develop APIs. Once you have designed your rating artifacts, you want to be able to execute those in order to calculate your premiums. So for those, we have execute APIs, which are your runtime APIs. And you can use these runtime APIs to either calculate a premium for a single policy, or you can do a bulk rating. You can even do a subset of policy coverage calculation with these, and matrix rating as well to compare across policies. Next, once you have executed your APIs and you have tested them out, you want to deploy your rating artifacts, right? So for that, we are providing your deploy APIs, which are basically your publishing APIs. And what these will allow you to do is select your environment, and they will allow you to approve or decline if that's in the process of deployment for you guys. And then with the click of a button, they will allow you to promote the rating artifacts or the rating changes into your new environment. Last but not the least, even if something goes wrong, we have undeploy APIs, which will help you roll back the changes that you did. And lastly, we have search APIs. These search APIs help you to look up these different rating artifacts before you go on and create duplicates. So moving on, how are these rating APIs useful? So let's take example of pricing process, which many of you might be familiar with. Pricing is a very complex process, and you know that actuaries need to collaborate with different teams, and most often these different teams work in different systems. So that means switching around between teams and between systems to be able to complete the whole pricing process. So starting with data preparation, actuaries need to work with ML engineers and data scientists inside a data studio or some other kind of similar system to prepare the data. Once the data is prepared, they need to move to predict, which is a tool used to create the predictive models. And these models basically form the basis for actuaries to then finally come into Tune, which is their core system of work, and create scenarios and test the impacts of the rate changes. Once they have, in order to do those scenario testing and impact analysis, they need rate design, rate changes, and rate calculations, and that needs to be done in Rating Workbench. And once everything has been done, then they need to go to Explore, which is our analytics system, which will give them more insights and then feed back into the data system. So you see, it's a whole set of different systems and different stakeholders involved, which increases the pricing timeline. And this is what we are trying to improve a little bit with rating APIs. So especially this bottom portion where Tune interacts with Rating Workbench, this is where our rating APIs will be most useful. Now, before I move into how rating APIs interact with Tune, let me touch a little bit on Tune, because maybe most of you attended yesterday's session held by actuaries, but for those who are not able to make it, Tune is basically a centralized platform where the actuaries work to build their predictive models, to create their scenarios, to test the impact of those rating changes, and finally deploy the rates. So this directly impacts the growth and profitability of the company, so it's really, really important. And in order to analyze these impact of rate changes, they will need the rating APIs to be able to interact with Rating Workbench seamlessly without having to switch to different systems. And not only that, Tune is also a place where they can collect all the data that is needed to then present to the various stakeholders in order to get approval for the proposed rate changes. So as you can see, this is the whole ecosystem of Predict and Tune and Rating Workbench that works together for the entire scenario testing to be complete. So it starts with Predict, where actuaries create their predictive models, and then based on what the predictive models are suggesting, they'll go ahead and create these scenarios. And what these scenarios are is suggestions of changes in a rate factor inside a table, or maybe tweaking your rate routine a little bit. And once you have, in order to do all of those changes, again, instead of switching to the Rating Workbench, they can simply call in develop APIs, and these develop APIs will help them modify those rate factors or do those rate routine changes that they need inside the Rating Workbench. Once they have done these changes, they need to test the impact of these rate changes on a particular set of policies, be it their entire book of business or be it their data set of a particular line of business. They just need to call in the execute APIs, and these execute APIs will go into the Rating Workbench. They will pull in the latest changes that they have done, and they will calculate the rates and pass on the final premiums back to Tune. And once the final premiums are available for all the different scenarios that they were trying to test, then they can easily use publish APIs before using the publish APIs, they will do, of course, their impact analysis and the dislocation testing and all of the things that are needed to finally arrive at the winning rates. And once they have decided the final rates that is most suitable, then they will quickly use publish APIs, which will allow them to select the proper environment where they need to promote the final changes, and then with a click of a button, deploy them back into the rating engine. So you can see how rating APIs make it easy, convenient, and secure for the actuaries to do everything without ever having to leave their core system of work and without any IT dependencies. So I think with that, we'll end our presentation and leave some time for questions about rating and rating APIs. Thank you.
So within Tune, I saw you gave the example you could change some rate tables. Can you change the rate routines directly? Like, would the actuarial department be able to do that as well?
Eventually, yeah. This first release is a minor release, so we're really just getting things warmed up. So the very first release is just incremental table changes, so you can tune the model. But eventually, it'll be full content, so whatever you want to publish in. Yeah.
The models and the prediction that you showed looks really cool, but probably two different questions related to that. One, do you have to be connected into Claim Center and have LDFs taken into consideration and all of that for that to be useful? And then my second question is, particularly for those of us who are early in implementation, for those models to be useful, you need a lot of years of data to understand the trends and things like that. So how much time before that's useful, or are there other ways to get at historical data without migrating policies that were never in Policy Center in the first place?
It's a great question. Actually, our tune guy is right here. I don't know if you want to grab a microphone and maybe address that, Alex?
If you saw the pricing process that they were showing a couple of different products as well. So at the beginning, there was Data Studio and the data platform. So we're assuming that for Tune and for the rating engine, you've already done the cleaning of the data, the consolidation of the historical data, the massaging of it, transformation, and that goes straight into your predict. So it's expecting a model-ready data set. And then we're also coming up, of course, with the data platform and Data Studio, which allows you, in fact, to do those steps. So for now, it's basically yeah. Did I answer any question? Was there anything that wasn't clear?
No, I guess I'm just, from what I'm hearing, it's like historical data, things like that, it would need to be prepared and imported in some way at some point in the future, which means
Yes.
it'll take us a little while.
Yeah, so the vision is that with Data Studio, it's basically like a SQL editor, let's say, but specifically for these use cases. And we would have pre-curated queries that at the click of a button, you would say, generate historical data set. I want 10 years of data for my personal auto data set. And at the click of a button, it would generate that. It would also expose that script to you, so you could edit it and add in additional variables if you'd like to. And then that would be kind of sitting on top of the data platform, where just at the click of a button, you could just say, I want this to be available in Predict. Then you go in Predict, and then you could easily see that data set, which is already in a model-ready state. So you can create your models and then go to Tune, and then back into the rating engine.
So will it connect directly to SQL tables that might already exist? Or import from them?
In the data platform, yes. Yeah. So the data platform would contain all of your data from the core systems, and then Data Studio would generate those data sets like from the raw data into a model-ready data set.
Oh, if there's someone else first, I just kind of had a follow-up to that, but if you want to go. No, go ahead. My follow-up to that, I just want to make sure, so it's like if you have a legacy system with policy data, and like let's say you have a mainframe with SQL SQL tables. It's like, would you have to go through a migration process for that data so that it's available in your core systems, and then you could run that report? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, basically. So, of course, if you have legacy data, then there's not much that we could do about that. But of course, like Predict does accept, you can upload CSV files, or eventually you'll have Pickle or Parquet files that you can just upload, or you can just upload to the data platform, and Predict would already be connected to that. There's not much that we can do about the legacy data, but we do have services team that can help you to manipulate that data, get it out of the system, putting it into the right format.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you guys. Great demo. I think a lot of exciting stuff. I had a question on Predict and Tune. Have you guys done any analysis as to how big of a legacy policy data that you can run it, and then how quickly does it come back with a tuning result?
Perfect.
Like
You're talking about performance testing?
Yeah, I mean, it just making the changes in terms of tuning it and getting the response back. If I've got 10,000 policies versus 100,000 policies or 500,000 policies, like what's your guys' experience on
We're
that?
not quite there yet. So a lot of this stuff is in active development. So we haven't really started the performance testing piece. But I can say it's orders of magnitude faster than the existing RTM world. And Tune is going to go directly against the rating engine. It's not going to go through the quote process, which I didn't talk about. But there's actually a quote service that sits in front of the rating engine, and that's a composite service that does things like underwriting rules, policy sync, and all that stuff, and it's doing those things, trying to do them efficiently. But it still adds overhead. For Tune to work super fast, it's going to bypass all that and go directly to our execution APIs on the rate engine. So we're expecting it to be quick, but I don't have numbers for you yet.
All right, thank you, I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it's fine. So Predict and Tune work separately, but basically it has its own scoring system, and we're leveraging AWS SageMaker for that. It's actually really quick.
Yep.
I don't have the numbers for you right now, but
Thank you. I think through the exchange and the questions, it became more clearer that these are two different systems. It didn't really come across when it was explained. So those questions were like helpful to get that clarity. Thank you.
I have one question. Like, in case if people who have already started using Guidewire Rating, okay, on-prem, and they plan to migrate to cloud in future, okay, are there any tools to move this rating code, complex rating code, from current rating management to the the cloud version?
Sorry, I missed the last part.
So, are there any tools that would be provided for to migrate the
Yeah.
code from the on-prem version into the future state, the?
Yeah. So not in the next release or two, but directly after. So once we go GA, we're planning directly after that to include a migration tool. That migration tool is going to migrate your rate books, so the components inside. It'll bring all that stuff over. What we can't bring over is the GOSU code. So if you did a whole pile of custom functions, or you've got a lot of logic in your rate engine, then that stuff you're still gonna have to look at bringing over manually.
One more question I have is currently impact testing is part of the rating licensing, right? So in case tomorrow we start using the cloud, it looks like we have to have an analytical engine licensing as well, right? Is that correct assumption?
So what we're moving towards is that Tune will do the dislocation testing, and it'll do the scenario stuff, because it's going to have access to the data sets that you want to run and whatnot, and it'll already be tied in to our execution engine.
Okay, but is it different from the impact testing that we currently have?
Yeah, that's going to stay with the existing RTM.
Okay.
That didn't really get adopted a lot because its execution speed wasn't very fast. So to do a full portfolio depends on the size of your book, but it could take quite a while, like a day or two. So.
Yeah, you could think of Tune as the updated impact testing. That would be, instead of being in Policy Center, it would be externalized.
Okay, so but in case if we are planning to use impact testing today, right? So for tomorrow, right, when we start using the cloud version, so in order to utilize the same functionality, we might have to take analytical. I hope the analytics that engine is a complete different licensing compared to rating licensing. So we have to use that one, or yeah.
I don't know if the Policy Center will still have that in the cloud, that the impact testing section. If you still have that, you can still use it.
Okay.
But if you want a bigger functionality with Tune and the integration with the rating engine, it would be a separate license for the analytics.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. So you have announced a partnership with Earnix, and now you are enhancing so many things here. So how does both play in the Guidewire ecosystem?
That's a good question. Well, Guidewire believes in being an open door system, I guess. So our partnership with Earnix is important because we have a lot of customers that are either looking at or using Earnix. So if that's your choice as a company, we want to be able to support you. And we're early days in cloud rating still. So there's going to be people that need to move soon. So they'll probably choose an Earnix solution over our cloud solution potentially, just because of timing. But then there's some that like best of breed solutions as well. So we just want to empower you with the, whatever you need to be able to do your business.
Thank you. Can I ask one more quick question?
Sure.
So rating a lot of times require filing, right? So a lot of capabilities what you're showing here, we can change it on the fly. That's like great from technology standpoint, but I'm assuming that you're not discounting that fact in your design and processes that we might have to schedule and unschedule and do all that kind of thing.
might have to schedule.
Schedule, maybe my filing is getting approved effective 11/1 and I schedule my rating and all that, but then filing doesn't go through, then I have to redo that and change the effective date and deal with those kind of scenarios.
Yeah, so for filing, I mean, with Tune, we have a section that makes it simpler for actors to be able to file that, and then with the you can schedule that for later, right? So you can schedule your implementation to happen, your publishing of your rates to happen, to go from the test environment to the production 6 months from now, and then if ever it doesn't get approved, then you can also always just cancel that or postpone it to a bit later.
It's about setting the effective date.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw in the demo, but when you click on publish to rating engine, it asks you which environment do you want to, and then do you want to schedule it for now or for later. But that's in a test environment. You still need, or it's up to the company to decide, do you want the actuary to have full ownership of the rates being transferred to a production environment, or do you still want to have someone from IT, for example, to review the rates, making sure that they're okay, and go from the pre-prod to prod.
Hey. Question on kind of related to Ernix, but our current rate development now, all our actuarials start in another tool, and then they got to transfer the rates over, and that's their biggest pain point. We've done all the algorithms, we put them all in our SAS tool or Ernix tool, and someone has to recode these, and I got to test them all over again. So is this kind of an answer to that? Like, they actually have to now start in Guidewire, or do they still require to start in a modeling tool, get things to a stable base, and then move it over?
Well, the idea is that it's, there's no more handing off and redoing things. So the APIs allow us to, do, you work in your system of records. So for the actuaries, it might be Tune or it could be other tools. But we want them to be able to push a button and take their logic and turn it into rating components. So we want to condense that loop where you need to hand things off to someone and then have them redo it and open up all that room for error and stuff.
But do you see the actuarials doing development in Guidewire versus other tools with this cloud offering? Okay.
Did you want to take that, Alex?
I see actuaries, we're trying to give them the option, right? So
Yeah.
with this, they can do it.
They can,
If
okay.
you want to use another tool, then that's fine. And like Brad said, you can also connect your own tool. Well, the idea is that you could connect your own tool via APIs to the rating engine, but we're just offering you another solution. So
Okay.
the actuary within Predict can create GLMs or GAMs, predictive models. With those, they could go into Tune, which is also part of Predict, just another section to tweak the risk factors, and then see how that impacts the business. And once you're happy with that, at the click of a button, it's just, those rates are overwritten
Okay.
in the rating engine.
Okay.
So there's no IT or a team that has to manually put those into each cell. You're showing a bunch of rate tables. Imagine all of those, you have hundreds of them, and you have to input each element individually.
Okay.
Now it's done via API.
Okay. And just HVQ, you didn't mention, I don't think you mentioned it. Is that still a solution with this, or is no longer required? Because it was mentioned in the keynote the other day.
HVQ.
Oh, HVQ.
Yeah.
No, HVQ is still a solution, but we're
Okay.
looking at HVQ for really high volumes now,
Okay.
right? So, if you're doing 100 million or 500 million quotes a year or more, HVQ is a nice answer to that.
Okay.
The other thing that HVQ does, it gets rid of the Daffy Duck problem, which is, you get garbage data coming into your system of record.
Yeah.
So it keeps it in a separate
Yeah,
quote store.
that's the nice part. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So does that mean that you don't consider anything less than 100 million or 50 million, volume to be significant enough to cause any concerns if it is inside one?
Sorry, I'm just having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, you were not able to hear me? Okay, I can redo it. No, I had a follow-up to the same question about the HVQ and high volumes. You said you're considering HVQ for very high volumes such as 50 million or 100 million. Let's say it is much lesser than that. So you don't see that as a concern, that there could be so many codes coming in which may not get converted depending upon the conversion ratio. Let's say for a channel such as comparators.
Well, in the pure rating engine, this thing's stateless, right? So in RTM, it used to store stuff inside your policy center. Now it doesn't. So basically, we're creating a stateless message that we return. Whether you ingest that into Policy Center, stick it into the quote store, or whatever you want to do with it, I guess. It's totally up to you, but we're not storing that in Policy Center system of record anymore. So the lines between HVQ are a little bit blurred, and eventually I could see HVQ disappearing, and you're just going directly against the quote service. That won't be for a while until we get up to scale, of course.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, we have time for one more question right here.
Thank you. Excellent design. I just want to make sure that this is not overlooked. The stat generation, I want to make sure that stat generation, whether it's a code, either as part of the rate tables or after it comes from the routines, the statistical codes that are needed from the rating system to be able to be reported to the reporting vendors as needed, right, is taken into consideration.
Okay.
Did you follow my question?
I didn't, no.
You didn't. Okay, maybe you may want to note it as a stat code generation, right?
Code generation.
Stat codes.
Oh.
There are statistical codes that we need to generate, and we need to report it to the ISO, even like say as an example.
Okay.
I know you mentioned SBT, right? Maybe they're going to have conversations with SBT, and that's part of the rating system. It's not externalized.
So you're asking, are the stats codes going to be generated in the rating engine?
Yes, as part of the rating system, whatever you are developing, please take into consideration.
For SBTs, it's.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we'll be working through all that, especially as we start working more and more with the SBT group in Toronto. So we've started those discussions already.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for
Thanks, everyone.
attending.